Well, from now on, I would like to talk about the fourth dimensional spiritual world. That is the world of heaven and hell. I introduced the world of heaven and hell, to which a person has to go after he dies. As I mentioned in the book, I have been to the spiritual world. 나는 영계를 다녀왔다. This book. At the other round of the lecture. Well, from now on, I will tell you about the question as to whether the heaven and hell exist really, and as to where it exists now, and as to why we cannot see these two worlds. These heaven and hell are the places about which most sources of religion mention commonly. And these places are the ones to which the human beings should go after they die. It can be a matter of fact that the intelligent persons who live now in the 21st century may say that the heaven and hell can exist, even though they are not convinced of the existence of them. Why? Because most of the religious groups say the existence of them, the existence of heaven and hell. However, in the ultra-developed astronomy of our global village, the scientists cannot watch the heaven and hell. Whether whatever super telescope they may use so as to discover the worlds of the heaven and hell. Therefore, we can think affirmatively that the existence of the heaven as well as the hell may be the imaginable worlds which came out of the heads of the human beings. Furthermore, the persons who learned mathematics, physics, chemistry, or earth science are used to the way of thinking, which is logical and rational. As a result, they say, is it possible for the world which cannot be watched by the scientific apparatus to exist really? Therefore, we can say that the persons who raise the questions are apt to think of these questions as the area of the agnosticism. That is, we cannot know the truth with the intelligence as well as the oration of the human beings. However, if you watch the Swedenborg's book concerning the afterworld, and if you watch my lecture 지구천국, the Paradise on Earth 23-1 concerning the visiting record of Swedenborg, you can feel and understand that this afterworld exists really and absolutely around the earth, and that it does not exist only in our imagination. Therefore, I wish to explain this heaven and hell from the very scientific standpoint in detail. If there is a person who has watched my lecture from the beginning to the end, I suppose that he or she is aware of the reality of the heaven and hell quite distinctly. On the innumerable number of 60 times 10 or 90 times 10 planets in the universe, the non-living things, the plants, the animals, the human beings have lived together. Here, the living creatures repeat their lives again and again, which phenomenon is called the reincarnation. If these living creatures filed the experience abundantly and satisfactorily, it can reach the last step, that is the step of the human being. Then, at the last step of this human being, he reaches the last step, and finally he can enhance his body from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. When his body becomes the fifth dimensional light body, he does not die, and he can live infinitely without death anymore. Anyhow, before he reaches the fifth dimensional step, he has to go on to the fourth dimensional astral world, composed of the heaven and hell, and has come back to the earth repeatedly for nearly 100,000 years or several million years again and again, and has lived this weary life with pains and agony. By the way, one surprising fact is that our global village has entered the first step of the fifth dimension on December 21st, 2012. Then, why did the Earth enter the first step of the fifth dimension? Well, according to the various books published in the company called 나운명, especially to the book 2012, 지구차원 대천왕과 천상 메시지들, 2012, The Great Change of the Earth's Dimension and Heavenly Messages, page 340, this book, our universe has entered the 12th dimension from the past 11th dimension on this day, and accordingly, our galaxy as well as our solar system has been pulled up one step higher than before. Then our global village is now going toward the age in which all sorts of religion will be got together from the past age of the black and white confrontation, and we are now going toward the age of the comprehension of the mind discipline method from the age of each discipline method. Consequently, a person who suggests a epoch-making method of disciplining mind as well as body will appear, and this person will suggest a trans-sectarian or transcendental religion, and he will show this content in the internet or in the mobile phone. In addition to it, this person, Jung Do-ryung, has been extremely careful about man and woman relationship, and he has maintained the pure relationship without any paid or undesirable contact with woman. Consequently, it is anticipated that after a baby is born, he or she maintains the virgin state until he is married. And after the marriage, he or she will have the sexual relationship only with only his or her spouse. This is just the most ideal man-woman relationship in the fifth dimensional paradise. However, it will take more than 15 or 20 years to enter the complete paradise from now on. And so this term of 15 or 20 years is considered to be the intermediate times. During this term, when a woman becomes 40 or 50 years old, she does not need to have the sexual activity. However, the sexual desire of the male, of the man, does not come to an end in his 60s or 70s and even in his 80s. The reason of this difference between man and woman is that the physiological structure is different between them. Therefore, during this transition term, a married man can be permitted to have 2 other wives, most of whom are the secret or private spouse, and not the public normal ones. Of course, in some cases they can have them publicly, but I think that most of them have the secret ones. Then, after 15 or 20 years, when the complete paradise of the earth is constructed, a baby keeps its virgin state until it can get married. And when he gets married, he or she has to continue to have the sexual activity only with his or her spouse infinitely. This can be called the complete paradise relationship between man and woman. Well, the next thing that Jeongdorong has to do is to make all the people transcend the sexual desire, thanks to the mind discipline method which has been developed by himself. This method makes a person filled with a bioenergy which exists in all the universe abundantly. And as he practices the mind discipline, he makes the ki energy filed in 하단전, and from 하단전, this ki energy goes up to 중단전, and finally it goes up to 상단전, which is said to be the place of God. Therefore, any person who tries hard to discipline his mind and body can enter the level of a saint comparatively easily. There is another easy but quite important method to inhale the cosmic energy into the body of a person, and it is just listening to music. When he listens to music, the cosmic energy combined with the sound energy comes into the body through 백회, crown chakra, as well as through his ears. When he listens to music, his mind is clear, and he can get the higher level emotion as his mind. And this music listening contains nearly all sorts of music, like pop song, classical music, opera, papera, chanson, canzone, etc. And if the Jeongdorong listens to music, nearly all the people who know Jeongdorong will be able to listen to music with him simultaneously. And this activity can be called the miracle of the world. Thanks to this listening with Jeongdorong at the same time, all the people of the world can feel that they are just the same sons and daughters of God, and all the residents of the global village are just the same race as well as the same family members. Therefore, this Jeongdorong will be able to make the residents of the world become just the members of the world family. Lastly, as it seems that the artificial intelligence, AI, is expected to substitute nearly all the jobs in the near future, this Jeongdorong has to be the person who can enable each person to live the basic life even if he or she loses his job. In other words, he can start the paradise of the earth for the first time in Korea. As a person who has got the experience of buying and selling the stocks knows well, the concept of earning money has to be changed into that in which all the people can receive the dividend money from the nation. In other words, it is said that when we sum up all the assets of the land, houses plus buildings, listed or unlisted stocks, the money of all the banks, etc., then the total sum of all the assets of Korea is said to be as much as 7 kyung. 7 kyung is as much as 10 times of 7,000 trillion. And he can receive the dividend money from the government. Therefore, the concept of earning money has to be changed into this sort of receiving the dividend money from the government. In addition to it, the era of the present age has been changed into that of Aquarius, 보병공시대, Aquarius, from the age of Pisces, 쌍어공시대, Pisces. Furthermore, the present age is quite different from the past Old Testament or the New Testament age. That is, the present age is that of the verbal promise, 언약시대, of God. Like this, the concept of individual persons earning money has to be changed. That is, everyone receives the dividend money from the whole asset of the nation. In other words, the artificial intelligence earns money, and the tax of the money which each person has earned should be summed up by the tax authorities. And from this summed up money, each individual person can receive the dividend money from the government. If this pay system of the government is undergone, then the first step of the paradise can begin and all the people can escape from the agony of the problem of 의식주, clothes, food and house, 의식주, and all the people begin to live with bliss in the paradise of the earth. It is a matter of course that any war among the countries has to be abolished completely. Well, surprisingly, the Ashita Command of the Galactic Federation, composed of the UFO core around the Earth, is now watching all the nuclear weapons. If we think that the second great power of the military forces of the world is now 2025, in the middle of 2025, in the great difficulty after this country infiltrated Ukraine, and if we think that the shape of the territory which Russia has got from Ukraine looks like the jet-shaped, G-shaped, just like the center Taeguk line of the truth line of the Korean Peninsula, we can suppose that the two countries will begin the truth talk sooner or later. Judging from this situation, we can suppose that in our global village, there would be no country that would invade another country in the future. And this Russia-Ukraine war would be the last one among the countries on the earth. However, unfortunately, there occurred a war between Israel and Iran, and sooner or later it will stop at any rate. Well, let's consider the great natural disaster, such as the earthquake, which the Earth scientists anticipate to happen, and the eruption of the Baekdu mountain as well as the Fuji mountain, and the great natural disaster which the Chinese people are meeting these days. According to the result of the scientists' study, both Mount Baekdu and Fuji should have erupted already, and at the point where the Pacific plate and the Japanese plate meet, a great earthquake should have happened already too. In the summer of the last year, the mass media of Japan broadcasted greatly the anticipated volcano eruption, and the seaside earthquake would happen in June last year, 2024, but there was not an eruption or earthquake in Japan. This year, the scientists continue to assert that the natural disaster would happen in July again. However, my opinion is somewhat different from this. In other words, at the end of the year 2012, the Earth entered the first step of the fifth dimension. And the first prerequisite of the paradise is that there is no war among the countries, and the great scale earthquake or the natural disaster should become weaker and weaker. As an exceptional case, there has been occurred lots of natural disaster in mainland China. However, the most apparent attention-drawing natural disaster may be the eruption of Mount Baekdu as well as Mount Fuji, and the earthquake of the Earth's seaside of Japan, eastern seaside of Japan. Of course, I'm not an excellent spiritual competent person, and so there can be the possibility of the error. However, if I presume the natural disaster of Japan and the great disaster resulting in the tremendous death of the people would not happen, As the earth is under the management of God of the universe now, God has made the small-scale eruptions as well as the earthquakes up till now, and therefore there would not happen the great-scale ones in Japan or in North Korea. Well, considering the evil activities toward the Korean people during the Japanese rule over Korea, the sinking of the Japanese island into the deep sea can be considered to be possible, as Saint Turner predicted. However, I think that after Japan was defeated in 1945, she made effort to make the free democracy as well as the market economy go well with many free democracy countries such as America, England, etc., and Japan contributed to the world peace in some way. Therefore, I suppose that there was not any great disaster like the Japanese islands sinking into the deep place of the ocean. However, in the case of the mainland China, there can be the exceptional case. As we know well, China committed a lot of bad or evil activities in the past times, and as a result of the cause and effect of the principle of the cosmic law, China is now suffering the great natural disaster. The various sources of natural disasters, such as the flood, heavy snowfall, falling down of the fist-sized hailstones, ultra-high temperature, etc., can be stopped only when the upper positioned personnel has been changed greatly, and when they execute the free democracy policies. At any rate, let's go back to the first stream, that is, the national dividend money. This policy was asserted by a statesman who is now indicted by the prosecutors, and he is now in the jail under suspicion of the pseudo-religious activities. He created and used the terminology called the national dividend money. However, here it is not appropriate to use his words, and so I think it's good to use another phrase instead of this politician's terminology. I think that we may as well use the phrase such as the national basic income, or the national basic expenses, or the national basic pension. This national basic income system should be realized absolutely due to the result of the artificial intelligence. And as soon as this national payment system is realized, we can enter the first step of the genuine paradise of the earth. By the way, the first duty of the statesman has to put the utmost importance upon the benefit and happiness of the whole people. However, when we consider the political situation of the present reality, they usually show the phrase in which they put the first importance upon the benefit of the statesman himself or herself, as well as the political party which he belongs to. Therefore, the face of the domestic political activity should be changed fundamentally, and everyone may feel that only the changed political system can make it possible to execute the National Basic Income Fund. As a result, we can ask the question as to what sort of political type or what kind of method we can apply to the basic national income system. Well, first of all, as the mind of the people is the mind of God, the election system in which the mind of the people is reflected completely should be set up. And in order to set up the right election system, first of all, the rigged election activities have to be got rid of course. Due to just this problem, President Yoon moved martial law. And because of this matter, America sent the watching group against the rigged election to Korea just before the present presidential election, May 2025, is held. I think that the intention of this dispatch is to prevent desperately the allied country Korea from changing into the pro-Chinese nation and to prevent the newly elected president from falling into the Venezuela-type tyranny or dictatorship, and to prevent him from holding all the power of administration, justice, parliament, and lastly, to prevent the people from falling into the poverty-stricken situation in which some persons seek the food in the trash boxes beside the street like the people of Venezuela today. Then, into what sort of system the future politics will be able to change, and with what sort of means and method this system of the national basic income will be able to be made. If I use a little magnitude expression, I can achieve it by means of a certain strategy as well as a certain tactics. Well, let's start telling about this thing now, and let's come back again to the theme of the heaven and hell. Around all the planets in the universe, there exists the fourth dimensional astral world, and the reason why the heaven and hell exists is that during the reincarnation procedure of a person, he absolutely needs a place for rest after he dies, and this temporal resting place is just the heaven and hell. If the astral world exists around the earth, it is a matter of course that people can see it. However, it is not visible to the residents of the earth, and all sorts of religion cannot explain this point at all. However, the residents of the global village who learned physics and chemistry when they went to middle and high school will nod their heads affirmatively if I explain scientifically the reason why they cannot see the heaven and hell. In other words, if we split the matter on the earth again and again, we can reach the point of the molecule. And if we split this molecule again and again, we can reach the point of the atom. And finally, we can reach the nucleus as well as the electron which circles the nucleus. Of course, this atom is composed of the neutron as well as the proton. Again, these proton and neutron can be split into the quark, and the quark can be split into the lepton, etc. Theoretically, a thing can be split into the minus 33 times of 1 meter, and the ultimate real existence cannot be called a tiny thing, but it can be called to be a string. This idea of a string is the one part of the ultra-modern physics, and it is called the superstring theory. However, I do not want to consider the elementary particle physics, and I want to see about the heaven and hell in relation to the elementary particle theory. Therefore, let's go back to the former situation and consider the situation of both the atoms and electrons. Well, here the problem is the speed of the electron which circles the nucleus. In other words, the speed of the electron is as high as that of the light. Therefore, an electron circles the nucleus several billion times a second. You can understand this point, for the speed of light is as fast as it circles the Earth 7.5 times a second. Now, at this point, let's suppose that under probability, the speed of electrons which circle all the nucleuses of the atoms is about 2 billion times a second. Then, let's suppose again that the speed of all the electrons of the fourth-dimensional astral world is about 3 billion times a second. Then in this case, the speed of the electrons of the Earth and the fourth-dimensional heaven and hell is different from each other. And so any person on the Earth cannot see the astral world, even though he uses any ultra-modern sort of scientific apparatus. Then, if a person on the Earth uses some extraordinary scientific apparatus or with a certain capability of God, if he makes the electrons of the fourth-dimensional astral world circle nearly 2 billion times a second, then this person on the Earth can see the heaven and hell, of course. Again, at this time, if a person makes the electrons of the astral world moves 1 billion times a second, then the person on the Earth cannot see the heaven and hell again. Like this way, if we listen to my explanation on the existence of the heaven and hell, this person might say, oh yes, I can understand the reason why we cannot see the heaven and hell. Next, Swedenborg, who was the famous spiritually competent person of Sweden, wrote a book concerning the fourth-dimensional astral world after he went to the heaven and hell, meeting lots of persons to talk with them and came back to the earth repeatedly for several tens of years. As I explained it well in the round 23 of the Paradise on Earth, I will not mention it today. The next question is the one as to whether the heaven as well as the hell exist only around the earth or whether it exists around all the planets in the universe. We can answer this question easily if we think of the question as to why the heaven and hell exist. The reason why the heaven and hell exist is that the human beings file the human experience for the term of nearly several 100,000 years or several million years as they go to the heaven and hell after they die and come back again to the earth and repeat the life again and again. At this time, he should not be born in another planet different from the earth. The reason why he should be born again and again on the earth is that he has to be born and die again and again on the earth because his karma, or up of the Buddhism terminology, is filed on the earth, and so he has to file the life experience as he gets rid of the karma on the earth continuously. This is just the will of God. For this reason, each planet in the universe has got its own fourth-dimensional astral world composed of the heaven and hell. Therefore, as our Earth entered the first step of the fifth-dimensional paradise on December 21st, 2012, it will become the complete fifth-dimensional paradise society after nearly 15, 20, or 30 years from now on. At this time, the problem is whether the fourth-dimensional hell and paradise continue to exist after the earth enters the fifth dimension. When the thought of complete paradise is made, all the people become the existence living infinitely, transcending death, and so there is no need for the fourth dimensional astral world to exist. Therefore, at this time, God of the universe gets rid of this fourth dimensional world. Anyway, our global village is now in the transition period between the past third dimension and the future fifth dimension.